Alina came into the world in silence and shadows, born with eyes that never opened to light, but a heart that overflowed with it. From the very beginning, she never knew what colors looked like, but her tiny soul invented them anyway. Blue was the sound of rain tapping her windows, red was the warmth of her father's hand, and gold was the sound of laughter echoing through the walls of their small home. Her father, Armand, was her entire world. He read stories into her ears, painted pictures with words, and whispered dreams into her sleep, promising that one day she'd see the stars, not just in her mind, but in the sky above. His presence was a constant warmth, the only one who made her blindness feel like a gift rather than a curse. But that dream ended the night he died in a brutal car crash, leaving Alina, just 6 years old, in the care of a woman who never once called her daughter. Ruxana, her stepmother, had only tolerated her father's second marriage for money. And with him gone, she inherited not just the house and insurance, but also a blind child she never wanted. For a while, she pretended, smiling at neighbors, accepting charitable donations, and even showing Alina off to NGOs as her special girl. But behind closed doors, Alina was a burden, an extra mouth to feed, a shadow in the hallway. She was made to eat separately, wear torn clothes, and listen silently to the sounds of parties thrown by Ruxana and her socialite friends while she hid in her room, tracing imaginary constellations on the cold floor, even as the dust collected. On her toys and books, Alina never lost her inner light. She found joy in touch, in smell, in sound. She'd sit by the open window and hum along with the birds, whisper stories to the wind, and lose herself in old radio shows, especially ones featuring a voice that made her heart tremble, a man named Xavier Ashraf, whose calm, warm tone made her believe she wasn't alone. He was a tech genius, a billionaire. But what made him unforgettable to Alina was not his wealth, it was the way he spoke about empathy, about giving, about how blindness didn't mean darkness. He talked of designing software that translated touch into music, of seeing the world not with eyes, but with feeling. Alina became obsessed not with his fame, but with the hope in his voice. She would save her words all day just to speak them aloud at night, pretending she was in conversation with him. She imagined him as a man who looked past what the world called flaws and saw the beauty that only kindness could reveal. When she was 13, she asked Ruxana if she could send him a letter just to thank him. Hana laughed so cruelly that Alina's ears rang with shame, and the letter was torn before her trembling fingers could even finish it. You think someone like him would waste time reading your scribbles? Ruxana snapped, And for the first time, Alina cried, not because of what was said, but because, deep down, she believed it might be true. It was around that time Ruxana began running out of money. The insurance was gone. Her party circuit dried up, and soon the house was silent. Not because of peace, but poverty. Creditors began calling. Gas was disconnected, and she could no longer afford her lavish salons or designer heels. That's when a doctor named Frederick from Switzerland entered her life. He was introduced to her by a foreign businesswoman who casually mentioned the cornea black market. It started with a joke, but Ruxana's eyes gleamed when she learned what healthy young corneas were worth. Alina, with no guardian to protect her and no sight to know what was happening, was the perfect victim. When the offer came to $100,000 for both corneas, no questions asked, Ruxana didn't even blink. She sold Alina like a piece of furniture. There was no remorse, no hesitation, just greed. She told Alina they were visiting a clinic for a vision checkup, and the young girl, full of quiet hope, followed obediently, unaware she was being led to a butcher's table. The clinic was hidden in an abandoned wing of an old hospital with rusted elevators and flickering lights, and the moment Alina was taken inside, she sensed something was wrong. The walls whispered secrets, the staff avoided her questions, and when they injected her arm with a sedative, the world began to blur. She didn't know that nurses' whispered prayers were actually desperate warnings that her life hung on a thread, but fate has strange timing. That nurse, horrified by what was happening, made an anonymous call to the only place she believed could help, the Xavier Foundation for the Blind. She didn't know if anyone would answer, but she had heard Xavier speak once about never turning away a child in need, and she took a chance. When the message reached Xavier's desk, an underage blind girl being trafficked for her corneas in a hidden Lahore clinic, he felt something inside him twist violently. He didn't send a team. He came himself. He boarded his private plane, eyes wide with fury and purpose, and by the time he landed, his name alone opened doors. Armed with lawyers, security, and fire in his voice, he walked into that clinic and demanded answers. The scene was chaos: doctors scrambling, nurses panicking, Ruxana trying to flee them. Then he saw her. A thin girl curled in a corner, shaking, half-drugged, her lips moving in soft panic. "Alina," he said, and her head lifted like she had heard a divine echo. "I know that voice," she whispered, tears crawling down her cheeks. "You're the man who sees with his heart." In that moment, everything paused. He didn't speak. He knelt beside her, took her hand, and made a silent vow in his soul. The surgery was stopped. Ruxana was arrested, her screams echoing through empty corridors as Xavian stood over Alina like a shield made of purpose. The clinic was shut down. Authorities seized everything. But more than anything, a quiet girl who had spent her whole life in darkness was finally safe in the hands of a man who had made a fortune by building light. That night, Alina was taken to a quiet, secure facility. Xavian refused to leave her side. He stayed in the same hallway, sitting outside her room until morning, occasionally whispering stories to her just so she wouldn't feel alone. When she awoke, still groggy, she heard that voice, again gentle, calm, cool, reassuring him for the first time in her life. She smiled and felt safe. "Where am I?" she asked. "Home," Xavian said softly, though they were thousands of miles from his mansion, and somehow she believed him. The days that followed felt like living inside a dream Alina never dared to imagine. As though someone had opened the door to a world that had been waiting quietly just for her, hidden behind years of shadows, pain, and loneliness. Xavian didn't just offer her a bed in a hospital or protection from danger. He offered her dignity, choice, and the warmth of being seen even without her sight. He arranged for her transfer to a serene, private wing of his foundation's rehabilitation center in Istanbul, where birdsong filled the mornings and the scent of jasmine wafted in from the courtyard. She was gently reintroduced to the world, not through force, but through kindness, touchable books, personalized audio therapy, and voices that didn't scold but celebrated every small step she took. Xavian didn't overwhelm her with attention or try to play the hero. Instead, he quietly became a part of her routine. Every evening, he would sit beside her in the sunroom and read her stories, describing the landscapes with such vivid poetry that she often forgot she couldn't see them. When he spoke of mountains, she felt their weight in her chest. When he described the sea, her fingers itched to feel the waves. One evening, she asked him why he was doing all this for her. He paused, then said, "Because someone once saved me, too, and I never got to thank them." She sensed a sadness in him he rarely let anyone see, like a wound buried under polished armor. And from that night on, she began listening, not just to his words, but to his silences. Doctors began assessing her vision loss and discovered a rare but operable retinal disorder that, with recent advances in stem cell and corneal reconstruction surgery, could potentially be reversed if, not fully, at least enough to give her partial sight. It was a miracle wrapped in science, and when they told her the odds were promising, her hands trembled. She had spent 15 years never seeing a single shadow, and now the door to light was creaking open. But instead of joy, she felt terror. What if the world was uglier than the one she imagined? What if she opened her eyes and saw pity in everyone's face? What if the people she loved didn't look the way she imagined? When Xavier asked her what scared her most, she whispered, "What if I'm not ready to see what's real?" He held her hand gently and said, "Then I'll help you see what's beautiful instead." Those words clung to her like a safety net, and finally, she agreed to the surgery. But in the weeks leading up to it, something deeper began to grow. Between them, not romantic at first, but something warmer than friendship, more sacred than gratitude. They began exchanging personal stories. He told her about growing up poor in Karachi, building his first computer from broken parts, losing his younger sister to cancer at 12, and how that pain had driven him to spend his life trying to fix the broken things no one else wanted to fix. Alina listened like every word was a thread, sewing her heart together. In return, she told him stories of her father, how he'd walk her through gardens and describe each petal with wonder, how he taught her to identify people by their footsteps, and how she used to imagine colors based on people's emotions. Xavier was stunned when she told him, "I always thought your voice was dark blue, calm but full of oceans." He smiled and said, "And I always thought your words were golden soft, but impossible to ignore." As the surgery date approached, Xavier flew in the world's leading ophthalmologists, sparing no expense, but also made sure Alina was emotionally ready. He gave her an old camera to touch, to understand what lenses were. He guided her fingers across paintings. He let her feel trees, clouds, even the contours of her own face in a mirror. "See with your hands first," he said. "So when your eyes awaken, your heart is already prepared." The night before the surgery, they sat quietly under the stars, and Alina, feeling his presence beside her, reached out and asked softly, "If I open my eyes tomorrow and you're the first thing I see, will you still visit me after that?" Xavier turned to her, visibly moved, and said, "If I'm lucky enough to be the first thing you see, I promise I'll never disappear." She smiled through her fear, and for the first time, whispered the words she'd never said to anyone, "I don't want to see the world if you're not in it." The surgery took 6 hours. Xavier waited the entire time, pacing the hospital corridors like a father awaiting news of a child. When the doctors finally emerged, they told him the procedure went better than expected. And with proper recovery, she would begin to see gradually over the next few weeks. When she awoke, bandages covering her eyes, he was there beside her, reading softly from her favorite book. "You're here," she whispered hoarsely. "I always will be," he replied. The following days were a delicate ballet of patience and emotion. Each time the bandages were loosened, she saw more first shadows, then light, then blurred outlines. One afternoon, as golden sunlight poured into the room, her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in her life, she saw the silhouette of a man standing by her window, his posture calm, his presence grounding. "Savian?" she asked. He turned, and in that instant, their eyes met. It wasn't perfect, his face was a blur, but she knew it was him. "You don't look like I imagined," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You're better." He stepped forward, kneeling in front of her, and she reached out to touch his face. "You don't need to imagine anymore," he said softly. That moment became the foundation of everything that came after. Her vision slowly improved over weeks, and each day brought new revelations. Trees weren't as tall as she thought. But the greatest joy wasn't what she said, was how she could now share a world with someone who had once felt just like a dream. Xavier gave her more than vision. He gave her a place in the world, a future she could shape with her own hands. And Alina, once a hidden secret in a cruel house, was now stepping into the light, not just as a survivor, but as someone who could create light for others. One day, she asked him, "Why do you always look tired?" And he chuckled, surprised. "You never asked that when you couldn't see." She touched his hand and said, "That's because now I can see how much of yourself you give to everyone else." In that moment, he realized she didn't just see the world, she saw him. The months that followed were not just a journey of healing for Alina's eyes, but a complete awakening of her spirit. A reclamation of her identity, her voice, and her purpose. Quiet revolution blooming in the heart of the same girl who had once believed that the world would never see her, hear her, or love her back. As her vision became clearer with each passing week, she was astonished, not by the beauty of the world itself, but by how much more beautiful her inner world had always been in comparison. She watched the sea rise and fall outside her window, tasted the colors of food she'd only ever imagined, and wept the first time she saw her own reflection in a mirror wide. Expressive eyes with so much sadness and fire behind them, framed by the delicate strands of dark hair she always thought might be curly, but had never known. What struck her most wasn't her face, was the faint, gentle smile forming at the corners of her lips. The kind of smile that whispered, "You made it." And beside her, every step of the way, was Xavier, not as a CEO or a rescuer, but as a companion, who never treated her with pity, never made her feel like she owed him gratitude, and never looked at her like someone fragile. She noticed how different he was when he was around her, how his laughter came more easily, how his eyes lingered longer on sunsets and books, how he now walked through his mansion like it was alive again, no longer a mausoleum for ambition, but a sanctuary for two beating hearts, rediscovering the meaning of home. She began painting again, this time with sight and memory dancing in her hands, mixing what she felt with what she saw, and her canvases became windows into an emotional language only her soul could write. She painted Xavier more than once, not in detail, but in color, deep ocean blues for his depth, burnt amber for his hidden wounds, and golden streaks for the moments he let his guard down. Just enough to show her the tenderness he hid from the world. She would watch him speak at global summit and return home late at night, exhausted, but still knocking softly on her door just to ask how her day was. And she began to realize that what they had wasn't ordinary yet, was sacred. They weren't two people thrown together by fate. They were two survivors who had seen too much, lost too much, and still found something beautiful in the ruins. But as her vision improved and her story became international news, the world began to ask questions. Was she his adopted daughter? A rescued prodigy? His muse? Their relationship defied categories, and though both of them felt something stronger than friendship, deeper than gratitude, they never rushed into giving it a name. One evening, while preparing for her first international art exhibit in Paris, Alina stood in the gallery, surrounded by her own work, overwhelmed by flashbulbs and reporters calling her the miracle girl, when she turned and saw Xavier watching her quietly from the back of the room, not as a billionaire, but as a man who looked genuinely proud, genuinely moved. Later that night, on the balcony of their hotel overlooking the Eiffel Tower, she asked him, "Do you ever feel like we're not living in real time?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "No, I feel like we finally started living when I found you." She didn't need him to say he loved her. She already knew. And in her heart, love didn't need to be declared to be true. But the world around them didn't stop moving. Her past, though buried, had not disappeared. News of Ruxana's upcoming parole hearing made headlines. And despite the efforts of Xavier's legal team to extend her sentence, the law was cold and indifferent. Alina, now stronger than she'd ever been, asked to speak at the hearing, not to seek revenge, but to reclaim her voice. Dressed in white, her eyes clear, her spine straight, she stood before the parole board and her stepmother, who looked smaller than Alina remembered. "You didn't just try to steal my eyes," Alina said, her voice calm and clear. "You tried to convince me I was worthless, that I was nothing, but I was never nothing. I was waiting for someone to remind me I mattered. And now I live every day proving you wrong." Ruxana's parole was denied. That night, Alina didn't cry. She walked out of the courtroom and into the arms of Savian, who whispered, "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." Their lives became intertwined in ways neither of them expected. She helped him laugh again. He helped her believe. They began traveling together, not as lovers flaunting their story, but as quiet partners who shared the same mission: to find broken stories and rewrite them. In Mumbai, they opened a school for blind children with art therapy. In Nairobi, they launched a mobile clinic for corneal restoration. And in Lahore, they turned the very clinic where Alina had nearly lost her eyesight into a rehabilitation center for abused girls. On the 1-year anniversary of its reopening, Alina gave a speech in front of a crowd of hundreds, standing beneath a golden plaque that read, "From darkness, she created light." Her voice trembled, but her message didn't. "I wasn't saved," she said. "I was reminded of who I've always been. And now I live to remind others of the same." After her speech, Xavian took her hand in front of everyone and said, "Alina, you once told me you imagined my voice as ocean blue. Well, I see your soul as 1,000 colors, and I've spent every day falling in love with all of them." Gasps fluttered through the audience, but Alina just smiled through her tears and whispered, "Then fall, Xavian. I'm right here." He knelt, not with a ring, but with a question. "Would you spend your life with me not because I saved you, but because you saved me too?" She nodded, and the moment felt like the closing of a circle, the completion of a story that had begun in darkness, but would now forever be written in light. They didn't marry with fanfare. They married in a quiet ceremony on the shore, with the sea singing their vows and the sky blessing them with soft winds. Alina wore a dress the color of sunrise, and Xavian wore a smile that had taken years to find. Their vows weren't promises, they were acknowledgments. "You are the home I never had," she said, "and you are the light I never thought I'd find," he replied. As years passed, they never grew apart, they grew deeper. Their foundation expanded, helping millions. Their story became legend, but to them it was always simpler. A blind girl who could finally see, and a powerful man who finally allowed himself to feel. Every night, no matter where they were in the world, they would sit by a window, or stand on a rooftop, or walk barefoot in a garden. And Alina would say the same words she had whispered that night long ago. "I see everything now, and it's beautiful." And Xavian would always answer, "That's because you helped me see it too."